Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're glad you've joined us here for our next episode of Face to Face with Racism. Difficult conversations around covert forms of racism and white supremacy. I'm Reverend Jeffrey Moore.
Oh, I'm Reverend Heather Goddess.
And we're pastors at St. Stephen United Methodist Church. And we're glad you're here. Today, we're talking about bootstrapping or bootstraps theory. The theory that someone can raise themselves up by their own bootstraps and how that functions, particularly in this context, as a form of covert racism or white supremacy. So I'm going to pass the conversation off to Baranda Fermin and ask her to introduce herself and perhaps give us some opening thoughts.
Hey, y'all. So I'm Baranda Fermin, as Jeffrey mentioned, and I am a retreader. I think on this journey of life, I'm on my fourth set of tires or fifth set of tires as far as career is concerned about helping us get through life. And so one of my previous set of tires was as a sociology professor, which makes for very interesting sermons as a preacher. And so I taught as a mechanism of helping folks understand connecting and community and overcoming obstacles, social mobility, all of the ways that we understand that we move around in the world, despite where we might have been born. There's this idea that floats around, particularly in the United States, about the theory of bootstraps. And so just in short, the theory of bootstraps or bootstrapping is that when we need to get ourselves out of something socially or economically, politically, that we possess this will, or we should possess this will that socially compels us to really want to get in the muck and the mire and get ourselves out. And if you can imagine yourself being stuck in mud, a lot of times if you pull one foot up, you put weight on the other foot. And so this idea that particularly in the homesteading history, when there was lots of land that we hadn't really paved into sidewalks, this idea that you would have straps on your boots to either help with your horses, if anyone hikes, there's these aspects of things that are on your boots that usually help you travel, that can get you out of the muck and the mud. Particularly as a social concept of like how to be upwardly mobile or how to get yourself over political, economic, cultural obstacles. You can just tell from describing it that there's a little bit, not a little bit, there's a ton of assumptions in that. First of all, you have shoes. First of all, your shoes were equipped for traveling in the first place. In the third place, the fact that you can move freely and that you can be traveling. There's just to name three of them that are potentially problematic when we talk about race and economics in the United States. So that's my sociology life. That's just sort of like to kick us off and sort of give a framework that I taught mostly in community colleges and public four-year colleges, where about 50% of the population came from community colleges or were from the local area. So that understanding of what bootstrapping sort of colloquially is something that's taught ubiquitously. So if folks enter college or take high school college credit or have intro level sociology, either in high school or in college, that's the idea that they get. That in the United States, we really think that it's helpful, not just politically or socially, but it's really helpful to your own personal sense of accomplishment and will to be able to do this thing. And so I'll sort of stop there unless I get the go ahead. I'll sort of I can bridge that into why I don't necessarily use that in my preaching and community organizing, but I can save that for later too.
Yeah, let's save that and come back around to it. And let's pass off to Edwin.
How y'all doing? My name's Edwin Robinson. I always tell people I use Reverend when it suits me. So use it at your will. I'm a community organizer and political consultant, founder, one of the founders of Dallas Black Clergy for Safety, Equity, and Justice, a civil rights organization here in the Dallas, North Dallas area. The topic of bootstrapping, such an interesting topic. But the first thing that comes to my mind as a historian, as a civil rights leader, is the famous Martin Luther King Jr. quote that says simply, "It's all right to tell a man to lift himself by his bootstraps. It is cruel just to say that to a man who has no boots." And I believe my sister, Rev Dr Baranda Fermin, was hinting at that and actually said it quite clearly in her initial statement. This idea of bootstrapping in the context, let's first just talk about it and let's leave race over here just for 1 second. Because the reality is that the bootstrap theory is harming everybody in America. This idea that any of us showed up on this continent with the ability to simply pull ourselves up by our bootstraps in the midst of capitalism is just it's a cruel joke. And then once we throw in racism on top of that, then we create this weird stratification, right? Where white people begin to get frustrated with black people who they see with any upward mobility because racism exists. And if racism exists, then I should be able to move faster. But black people keep telling me racism exists, but I see black people moving faster than me. It's this weird mental cycle that it takes us through when the simple reality is this: none of us, not one of us, not one of us are here are quite able to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Not even Donald Trump pulled himself up by his own bootstraps. It was his father who gave him $1 million investment that he was able to take to make himself into even something better. So the simple reality is it is not one of us. It is not one of us. The hedge fund owner, the mogul, all of them. No, they were given gifts. They were given rewards. And look, there are some people in this country, absolutely, who through hard work and entrepreneurship and all things are able to make a way for themselves. But the reality is still this: we don't print our own money. The money that is printed in this country is printed by the United States government. We have a sovereign currency. What that then means is any currency that is printed is owned by the United States government. And it is not us who are making money. No, 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 no. We are simply getting money, borrowing money, and then passing that back and forth. So the only people getting rich are those who made the money and put the ridiculous interest rate on the money, so that we could then give them more money that we cannot create. It is money that they create. So then we have to borrow more money to then give them the money that we borrowed from them in the first place. So at its base, there is not one of us in this country that has the ability to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And then when you put racism on it, and then when you put the fact that black people made the bootstraps, and then when you put the fact that black people had to do the field work and do all the work to actually sell you the bootstraps and shine your bootstraps and clean your bootstraps, and then you took those bootstraps and put them on our back after we gave you the bootstraps, that puts us at a whole other position in this conversation. So simply put, the bootstrap theory is just irrelevant and false for all of us, not just black people, white people, brown people, women, the able, the disabled, our LGBT sisters and brothers, and everybody in between. And we need to give it up. We need the government to pay what they owe, because they make the money. And if they would give us the money, then we could all have some bootstraps. Then we could all do some pulling up. And there is my point.
Thank you. I'm intrigued, not intrigued. I'm distracted.
Even the animals are amening over there at the goddess.
Amen. Amen.
All creatures, big and small.
I don't want to get off on the topic of reparations, although That's certainly,
It's down,
you know,
it's down the road.
it's down the road, but and not unrelated to self-made people. But it's interesting to me to hear people, for example, start talking about, well, we can't give stuff away like that. You know, that wouldn't be right. I want to say, have you ever heard of homesteading? Nearly a quarter of the population of America is sitting on inherited wealth right now because they were homesteaded and given free land. Hello, you know.
They were actually, I mean, they were actually given stolen land.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Okay.
So I mean, I am, yeah, I came from the one of my degrees is from the University of Oklahoma, where our cry at the beginning of every basketball, football, hockey, swimming, whatever celebration we have is Boomer Sooner. And that saying comes from those folks who lined up at what was drawn as the border of Oklahoma and said, they're now a new state. We had a meeting. They're a state. We've got to populate this state. And so line up here, pitch your tents, get your water, get your sandwiches, your fried chicken, pack them up, basically Oregon Trail. And in the morning at sunrise, we will pull out the cannon and say, boom, and that's your starting, and go as far or stop as close to the starting line as you want and set up your homestead. And you will be the ones to have started our new state. Now, the Sooners were the folks who waited till after the sun went down and didn't wait for the cannon in the morning, and they started creeping out very slowly to get just a bit of a head start. And so, you know, the idea of homesteading, the idea of what is the foundation? What are the soles of your boots? The thing that keeps you from laying in the mud and the dirt, just as a regular place to lay your head, is something that we haven't poked at socially, politically, culturally. And so the idea that the very soles of your boots, to which one might attach any straps at all, don't even belong to the manufacturer of the boot itself, would cause us to say, can this story we tell ourselves be real about what helps people and what doesn't help people?
Oh, a lot to unpack there, but want to make sure to get around the circle first. So Teddi, introduce yourself and
Hi, I'm Teddi Fulenwider, and I currently work for an active family engagement company that works with public schools, private schools, and a lot of Head Starts primarily. And I am a long time educator, from being in the classroom and then in mid-management. And I think that where pulling themselves up by the bootstraps applies in education is, and it took me a long time, embarrassingly and sadly, and attach whatever word you want to, for me to really come around to accepting is, I think that, well, first of all, our education system is really kind of built on, and has been historically, a white middle class structure. Typically, it's so ingrained in us that the dad worked, the mom was at home, so the mom could come and be engaged. The mom could come and volunteer. The mom could, you know, send the cookies. The mom could do all these things. And over time, Edwin, as you were, you know, kind of alluding to with capitalism and all that's not our system anymore. But our families of color, families of poverty, that hasn't been true for them in a long time. But since the majority of the educators still are white, I think where I have experienced the covert racism, or where I've seen it, is when white teachers think about their families of color or families of poverty. Well, if they just cared a little bit more about education, they would fill in the blank. If education was as important to them as whatever else, they would come and participate in all these wonderful things that I'm doing, or, whatever. And I think what I have learned over many years of talking to other people and then doing research is that I don't think my white teacher friends really recognize some of the barriers that our families of color and our families of poverty face. And I'm not even talking about the obvious barriers of no transportation or no childcare. But if all of our activities, if all the times that we want families to come for parent-teacher conferences or whatever are during my contract school day, those families are working. And I don't care how good your program is, if it's always at 2:30 in the afternoon, I'm still always going to be at work. But the other two barriers that I have really seen after, working with families is that a lot of our families of color, school was not a good place for them. School was not a happy place for them. They are still disproportionately disciplined or suspended. And so if that was my history, I don't have a good trusting relationship with that public school. And that's a barrier that has to be overcome and can only be overcome when it's recognized and we start trying to build relationships.
So it sounds like, Teddi, that what I'm hearing from you is that bootstrapping and blaming the victim often go hand in hand.
Well, yes.
So the bootstrap theory that this is actually some sort of reality, well, let's just call it a myth, the bootstrap myth, then turns into blaming the victim for not exercising bootstrapping.
Well, I think it's that mentality of I guess blaming the victim is more so, but it's like, they could better their lives if they would support their children.
Right.
We're giving them all the opportunities, but we're giving them opportunities based on my history, my life, my whiteness, my privilege.
Okay. Ryan. Yourself and
I grew up in a economically unstable situation. My father was a custodian, and to make ends meet, we spent every day from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. as a family cleaning offices. So my whole childhood memory is going to school during the day. This kind of ties in what Teddi said about like programs fitting like, the life you're trying to lead. And then 4 o'clock we go and we clean offices till about 11 o'clock at night. And then I come home and do my homework and get up the next day and do it again. And I think the biggest thing about poverty, and Edwin kind of referenced this, is that it's a lot like some of the other topics with racism we've been discussing the past couple months in this program. American society doesn't want to face the reality of what poverty is like in America, or the challenges that poor people face in America. They don't want to look through the eyes of the poor and see how those work. And I think that the bootstrapping is just a means of dismissing it. And also I think it's a means of shaming it. Because I think there's an enormous amount of shame in American society applied to being poor, to being the poor. And I think that's most, I think I've most experienced that as being a white person of poverty, because as a white person, I could pass. I don't know if that makes sense to everybody. Like, it wasn't assumed that I was poor. People had to get to know me to know what my socioeconomic situation was. In fact, when I first started teaching in North Mesquite, and the kids and I were getting to know each other, and a lot of them discovered that I had experienced growing up some of the same challenges they were experiencing. They were like, well, I didn't know. I just assumed you're like this hairy white dude. I just thought you were like from the burbs and like your dad was like an insurance salesman or something like that, you know? And so, and the thing is I realized, it was probably at that moment I realized that I'd been passing a lot during, because of the shame associated with being poor in America. And I think that shame just creates a circle with the bootstrapping thing where it's like, don't complain, you can do something about it. But I think what people don't realize about being poor, and what I most remember from my childhood, is how high stakes everything is when you're poor. Everything is high stakes. And things have to fall just right for you to get even a little bit ahead. And when things don't fall right or something unexpected happens, it can destroy you for 6 months. You know, just every little day things, a flat tire. The stakes are so high when you're living in poverty. When you're when you're working as hard as you can. And we were the working poor. I mean, we weren't lazy. I don't know what else my dad could have done. He worked 18 hours a day. You know, I mean, he worked all day and then came and worked with us all night. But the stakes are just so high. I mean, I remember the day I took my SAT, because it's probably the most stressful day of my life. Because I knew if I was going to get into a college like I wanted to, I wasn't gonna have to do okay. I mean, I needed to get like a 15 something. It had to happen. And I was able to do that, but I'm like, how many people can go in there and get a 15 something? You know, it had to happen. The stakes were that high and the odds were that long. And so I think that's what most poor people in America face, is that they have these long, long odds. And every situation, the amount of chips on the table are enormous, you know. And so I think that that's our biggest problem with the bootstrap theory, is people don't understand the day-to-day of being poor, and there's so much shame applied to it. But I think sometimes poor people, particularly white poor people, don't speak up and say something about that, you know, because like, you know, if you're poor, like you suck, you know, like you're horrible, you know. It's like a ethical or moral shortcoming that has made you poor. That's kind of like what I think the religion of American capitalism teaches us, is it's some ethical or moral shortfalling on your part as to why you're poor. Yeah.
It sounds like some of those things you're naming, shame, financial insecurity, living on the edge, to me sounds like that sort of the mud and the muck that Baranda was talking about at the beginning, when you try to pull your foot out and it sucks you back down. It's all of that weight on there.
And Jeffrey, I was just going to say, when you think about the bootstrap theory, if I'm living in poverty and I'm attending a school in that depressed neighborhood, I do not have the same opportunities that school in that upper middle class, you know, suburban neighborhood has. I work with programs that, with everybody starting back virtually, they not only they have dial-up service, and not even for everybody around them. They're outfitting school buses to be a hotspot, and the families are going to have to go walk up to the school. You know, well, that school there does not have the same opportunities, and so it's going to be hard for those children to pull themselves up when as I don't remember, it was Edwin or Baranda said, there are no straps to pull, there are no shoes.
Right.
And so if that school system or that school is in a depressed area, they don't have the same opportunities.
Edwin?
And if I was going to say, oh, you were going to go ahead, Jeffrey, please.
No, I was saying, Edwin, it looked like you had something you wanted to respond to.
Oh, No, I was going to add, I 100% agree with what has been said. I mean, even taking the point a bit further, I just think let's stop talking about bootstraps and let's just call it what it is. It's economic disenfranchisement, right? Let's just it's not people ain't got no people ain't got no money.
Right.
And it's
period.
And when we
let's just call it what it is. We ain't got no money. We ain't got no resources. And there's this reality of rugged individualism, right? That is fundamentally a very American, European idea, and even more American, white American idea. It's not a Black idea. It's not an African idea. It's not a indigenous people idea. But this idea of rugged individualism then means that, like as Reverend Dr. Baranda laid out with the Sooners, I'm going to run out with me and my family, and we are going to take our land and damn everybody else. And that in and of itself is fundamentally a problem. To add to that, just simply, let's talk about solving the problem really quickly. This is not rocket science, y'all. This really is not. It's not that hard. You don't have to have empathy. You don't have to understand. You don't have to have any of those things. This is really quite simple. We have a sovereign currency in the United States of America, which fundamentally means that our government can print as much money as they would like, as long as we leverage inflation. So then, in the same way, I'm retired from the United States Army. I've been to Iraq twice. We don't find money for war. We make money for war. Literally print money and then give it to the military. So if we can do that for all those things, then we can end poverty tomorrow. We can end education disparities tomorrow. We can end homelessness tomorrow. We can have a federal jobs guarantee tomorrow. People can get a guaranteed income tomorrow. All these things can happen tomorrow, literally tomorrow. This is not pie in the sky. This is none of that. It can happen tomorrow. It does not happen because people don't want it to happen. And therein lies our fight. So let's not try to weed through stuff.
Right. And I think the reason why we do not want it to happen, the reason why we fundamentally act like we don't want it to happen. And when I say we act like we don't want it to happen, we don't vote for it to happen. We don't ask for it to happen. We don't create policies and propose them for it to happen. The reason why we don't act like we want it to happen is because of the points that both Reverend Robinson and Ryan made about how we hide essentially the vegetables in the lasagna. And we say that this is a race thing when it's an economic thing, or we say it's an economic thing when we're really trying to hide our biases based on race. And if we call the thing that it is, right, that we try to make poverty and we try to make economic disenfranchisement moral issues that cause people shame, then when we call that thing a thing, particularly as white American Christians, and I say all of us white American Christians, because there's no real mainline or deeply rooted Christianity in the United States that is not white in its culture, right? Even Black churches, we have had theologies where we have had to try to get out of the white cultural Christianity that exists in the United States. And as culturally white Christians, until we name that thing what it is, which is poverty, economic disenfranchisement, and moral shame around that, then we can't deal with the fact that is, we know fundamentally for most of us within our theologies that is not the intent that we read the scriptures or our holy text to read. That our holy texts say there is no such thing as the individual, that we are a body, that we are a community, that we are supposed to be operating in cooperation with each other. And if that is the case, this individualized understanding of your family needs to figure out how to budget better, your family needs to figure out how to provide for itself, your family needs to figure out how to take care of its land, our family, our children, not those children, becomes the thing that we have to root out of our heart that begins to have us demand that our government, our economy, treat poverty and economic disenfranchisement with the same level of respect that it treats other types of safety issues that lead us to war.
Ryan, what?
I think the hard thing there is that I think that lots of people who are economically disadvantaged or living in poverty who are white, I think a lot of that community is in denial.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I think 67% of everyone on welfare is white in America. I mean, a large proportion. The difficulty in white America is a vast majority of people in the top earner bracket are also white. You know, the most privileged earners in America are white. And so I think white people are most apt to digest that dogma of like, you just gotta do better. You got this is on you. Like you should be able to figure out a way to get out of this situation you're in. And I think that that's such a huge part of the population that is struggling economically that is actually perpetuating that bootstrap idea, even though the system is not working for them themselves.
But Ryan, I think
that's a system that doesn't work for them.
I think because I can theoretically, I mean, not me personally, but I can feel better about myself and not feel guilty if I can say, well, you guys need to pull yourselves up. All the opportunities are there. It's not my problem. It's your problem.
I think that's part of what we need to begin to unpack. Right. Is that both of you said theoretically, not me. And then Ryan said, right, the proverbial you. And if we just say, so I can pull myself up by my bootstraps, I can do better. If we say that and sit with the fact of, actually, no, I can't do better. If someone had said to Ryan's dad, hey, Mr. Forkner, you can do better. Like, if he's anything like my dad, who was a contractor and oftentimes brought us to the work site, like, those are fighting words. What do you mean I can do better? Show me the hours where I can do better. Show me where I could have spent 50 cents more on that gallon of milk and still paid my electricity bill. Like, my dad, as private as he is, would have laid out the bank statements and the grocery bills and the receipts and says, oh, I can do better? Show me where I can do better. I dare you to show me where I can do better. And so if we stop using these proverbial, like, well, I'm not saying you so that we can feel better, and literally say, can I do better? If 67% of the folks ask themselves that, and the answer more than likely is going to be, I literally can't. There's not one less loaf of bread I could have bought and we still would have eaten and the lights would have stayed on. And when that happens, then what Edwin's talking about and Ryan's talking about coming out of this false understanding of who we actually are and what we actually have, not only as individuals, but as a nation, then we begin to demand, so can you, that stimulus is the same as when you make money for the war. So can we do that in a targeted fashion that meets these specific needs?
Right. So much to unpack. We'll have some time to do that. We're at the end of our time now, but I want to lift up one comment from Cynthia Astle, that because it points directly to the intersectionality that we're in right now. Cynthia says, why do you suppose that white people in poverty don't feel more solidarity with Black people when they're both in the same situation? Is it endemic racism or something else? And I mean, I think for me, the answer is, while there is intersectionality, this very question proves how covert, how subversive, and how deeply ingrained the racism is systemically in the system, that it would turn people who otherwise would be allies with one another against one another, or at least white against Black.
Cynthia, I think it depends. I think it depends on what makes people think of someone as the other. I've only been in an incredibly white space, really, when I was in college. Growing up in East Arlington and then teaching North Mesquite, I've not functioned in really white spaces, but I felt like I had to cover in college because the people I was with, they were all white like me, but they didn't understand my situation. And so I think it just depends on how we're seeing people as the other. I mean, I have no, as a person who's been a poor white person, I have no idea why that is. Because a rich white person doesn't have any idea what my life is like. But a poor brown person or poor black person, they have a better idea. The only difference between me and them is I have the privilege of being able to cover, when I'm in like a white space or I'm in an economically privileged space. My whiteness affords me that privilege to cover, in that space. I have no idea why that is.
One closing comment from Edwin.
Yeah, I would say if I could say it, I think the way that I see it, I'm not white, so I really don't know. I just say what I see. And what I feel like I see is the reality that, I don't mind being poor. I mean, like, I hate being poor, but hell no, I ain't never gonna be black. And let's keep it 100, right? And so it's like, yeah, I'm poor, but I ain't black. And so at least I'm not that. And
right.
and let's just call it what it is. This is not and I understand, absolutely understand. So I'm not being nitpicky with language, because I absolutely understand this idea of using a language of covert and subversive racism and all those sorts of things. But I do want to say that racism is not covert. It really isn't. It is right in your freaking face every daggone day. There is nothing covert about it. The very fact that my man Ryan just put it out there, right? He was talking about the shame of poverty. You know what I'm saying? And check it. So if you can pass as poor, and that means that, why I buy Jordans? You know why I got to have Nike on? You know why I got to have spinners on my car in 20s? You know why I got to have candy paint jobs? You know why my hair got to be tight all the time? You know why I got to go get my nails done and have my extensions? And y'all think, and not y'all, people think that black people are being frivolous and with our money. No, we're trying to survive. Because if we don't look a certain way, we get shot, even if we got $1 million in our pocket. And so it's really not subversive. It's just quite simple. I hate being poor, but damned if I'll be black.
Yeah.
And so just as a closing, and maybe for us to think about as we head into the other part of the conversation, is we're told it's covert, but what's actually being described, like when you hear Ryan and you hear Edwin, and you even heard what Teddi was saying, what's actually being described is blind spots. It's not that it's hidden. It's this, we just can't see it in our sight, right? Ryan couldn't understand Cynthia's question because he's like, well, what are you talking about? I'm around all the black and brown, like, I don't, right? And then Cynthia couldn't understand Ryan's position. And technically they're in the same group. And it's not a passing. It's not Ryan having to actively act like or signal that he has money in the way that a black or brown person does. It's that Ryan just has to shut up, which means the assumption, the blind spot is, right? The blind spot is that if you're not white, you must not have resources. And if you are white, you must, it's a blind spot. It's not hidden. It's also true, it's not a person. It is, right? It's a blind spot that I cannot understand something that's just out of my view. It's not hidden. It's just right outside my view.
And I just want to say, but it's because it's true.
Right.
And that's what I like. It's the truth that because I am darker than you, I have less resources. It has nothing to do with how good I am or how much I work. It is freaking true. And you can look at me by virtue of being in this country and being black and make very clear assumptions that are probably true. And that is the problem. That's why I say it's not covert, because it's real. You know it and you act upon it. The problem is we don't act to do anything about it, and we're okay with it being the case. Because like I said, I hate being poor, but damned if I'll be black.
These conversations are so important, and I think Edwin, I really appreciate your calling out that covert racism isn't really covert. I think that's really the point that we're trying to make in these videos, is these are things that we see and hear and do every day. And the more we start to talk about them, the more we start to uncover them, the closer we get to being anti-racist, which is our hope. Of course, with all of that uncovering of all of those things, it can get a little uncomfortable and it can get a little hard. And so again, just like we say every week, we want you to care for yourself. No doubt there are times where you've probably said something about someone else not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, maybe regardless of the color of their skin, but still, I'm hoping that maybe you might be seeing how that's harmful. And if you're seeing that, it's okay. That's why we do what we do. That's why we're having these conversations, and hope that we might continue to grow and learn about ourselves and continuing conversation. I have a feeling it's going to be a good backstage conversation. So we look forward to seeing you next week. But until Tuesday, when we drop the backstage, take care of yourself, be kind, and we will see you then.